April 17, 1945, 0547 hours. Northern Luzon, Philippines. Sergeant William Edward Eldridge, 23 years old, United States Army, 25th Infantry Division, lies motionless in a shell crater half filled with muddy rainwater. He's been here for 19 hours. The air smells like rotting vegetation and cordite. Humidity sits at 94%. Visibility through the morning mist, maybe 40 yards. His left leg has a through and through from yesterday. Field-dressed, still bleeding through the gauze. His canteen ran dry 6 hours ago. And somewhere in the ridge above him, a Japanese sniper has pinned down his entire platoon. Eldridge doesn't move, doesn't blink, because in his hands, wrapped in a rain-soaked poncho to keep the scope dry, is a rifle his own supply sergeant called a mail-order joke. A weapon his battalion commander tried to confiscate as unsafe. A gun that mechanics said would blow up in his face after 50 rounds. In the next 6 hours, William Eldridge will use that rifle to kill 24 enemy snipers. Alone, and he'll do it without moving more than 30 feet from this crater. But first, you need to understand why everyone thought he'd sign his own death warrant the day he ordered it. If you care about the weapons that changed history, not the famous ones, but the desperate improvised catalog order tools that shouldn't have worked but did, then hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists to pull these stories out of declassified reports and fading memories before they disappear. We're building an archive. Help us preserve it. Let's rewind 8 months. August 1944. Camp Stoneman, California. The 25th Infantry is preparing for Pacific deployment, and Sergeant Eldridge has a problem that's killing American soldiers by the hundreds. Japanese snipers are operating at ranges and from concealment positions that standard-issue M1 Garands simply cannot counter effectively. The M1 Garand, 8-round semi-automatic, .30-06 caliber, effective range about 500 yards with iron sights, was a revolutionary infantry rifle. Fast, reliable, powerful, but it wasn't built for precision counter-sniper work beyond 400 meters. And the Japanese had figured that out. Their tactics were methodical and brutal. A single sniper, often tied into a tree at 80 or 90 feet, would fire one shot, kill an officer or a radio man. Then wait. American forces would suppress the area with automatic fire, wasting ammunition. The sniper wouldn't move, wouldn't return fire. 6 hours later, another shot, another man down. Units would be paralyzed for days, unable to advance, hemorrhaging casualties to an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't reach. Standard American counter-sniper doctrine relied on the M1903A for Springfield, a bolt-action rifle with a 2.5x Weaver scope. Accurate, yes, but slow. And by 1944, production had nearly stopped. There weren't enough to go around. Divisions heading to Pacific were issued maybe 6 per battalion. That's 6 precision rifles for 800 men facing an enemy who'd spent years perfecting camouflage and fieldcraft in jungle terrain. William Eldridge had grown up hunting in the Appalachian backwoods of West Virginia, white-tailed deer at 300 yards in dense forest. He understood patience. He understood optics. And he understood that if he deployed to the Pacific with standard equipment, he'd likely be dead within a month. So he did something almost unheard of. He spent his own money, $74.50, nearly 3 months private pay saved from before his promotion, and ordered a rifle from a commercial sporting goods catalog. The gun that arrived was a Winchester Model 70 in .30-06 caliber, a civilian hunting rifle, fitted with a Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope. It had a 5-round internal magazine, a controlled feed Mauser-style action, and a 24-inch barrel that was heavier and more rigid than military issue. In the target shooting community, it was already being called the rifleman's rifle. But to the U.S. Army in 1944, it was an unauthorized, unapproved, non-standard piece of civilian equipment. When Eldridge's company commander saw it, he ordered him to surrender it immediately. Unauthorized weapons violated about 9 different regulations. They complicated supply chains. They introduced liability issues. And if it malfunctioned and injured Eldridge, the Army would be responsible. Eldridge refused. He took it to the company armorer, asked him to check headspace and timing. The armorer, a former machinist from Detroit named Corporal Vincent Ramos, test-fired it and came back shaking his head, not in disapproval, but in admiration. Groupings at 200 yards were under 2 inches. The trigger broke clean at 3.5 pounds. The scope tracked true. Ramos told Eldridge, "This is better than anything we've got in the supply tent. But if it jams in combat, they'll court-martial you." Eldridge said, "If I go over there with iron sights, I won't live long enough for a court-martial." Before we see what happened when Eldridge hit the jungle, I need you to understand something about the weapon itself. Not just what it was, but why it worked when doctrine said it shouldn't. The Winchester Model 70 was introduced in 1936 as a sporting arm. It wasn't designed for war. There was no bayonet lug, no provision for end-block clips. It held only 5 rounds and required the shooter to manually operate the bolt after every shot, just like a sniper rifle from World War I. But it had 3 features that made it devastatingly effective in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. First, the barrel. Winchester used a hammer-forged, free-floating barrel design that minimized heat distortion and vibration harmonics. In practical terms, that meant the rifle zero, the point where the bullet's trajectory intersected the crosshairs, stayed consistent even after sustained fire. Military rifles, built for durability and mass production, often shifted point of impact by several inches after 10 or 15 rapid shots as the barrel heated up. The Model 70 didn't. Second, the action. The Model 70 used a controlled round feed with a large non-rotating claw extractor. Every time you cycled the bolt, the next cartridge was physically captured and guided into the chamber. Mauser had invented this system in the 1890s, and it was bomb-proof. Even if you short-stroked the bolt or tried to load it at an odd angle, it would feed. Mud, rain, blood, it didn't matter. In the jungle, where moisture could turn a rifle into a corrosion-filled paperweight in 72 hours, that reliability was life or death. Third, the scope. The Lyman Alaskan wasn't a high-magnification optic. It was only 2.5 power, but it had a wide field of view and a simple crosshair reticle with no complicated stadia lines. In low light, dawn, dusk, under triple-canopy jungle, it gathered just enough ambient light to let you see a target that would be invisible to iron sights. And because it was designed for Alaskan hunting guides who needed to spot charging grizzlies in alder thickets, it was built to take punishment. Eldridge spent his last week stateside on the rifle range, firing 400 rounds to map the ballistics. He learned that his hand-loaded 180-grain rounds dropped 18 inches at 400 yards, 52 inches at 600. He memorized holdovers. He practiced shooting from prone, sitting, kneeling, and brace against trees. He dry-fired until the trigger press was unconscious. And then he boarded a troop transport to Philippines, carrying a weapon that wasn't in any supply manual and wouldn't be supported by any armor if it broke. His platoon mates started calling him Suicide Eldridge, not because they thought he'd get himself killed, because they thought he was crazy enough to try. By the time the 25th Infantry landed on Luzon in January 1945, Japanese forces had been pushed into the mountainous northern interior. They were dug in, fortified, and fighting with the desperation of men who knew they weren't going home. The terrain was a nightmare. Ridges covered in mahogany and bamboo, so thick you couldn't see 15 feet. Ravines choked with wait-a-minute vines that tore uniforms and skin. Trails that turned into knee-deep mud after 10 minutes of rain. And everywhere, snipers. The Japanese 14th Area Army had integrated their best marksmen into a layered defense system. Snipers worked in pairs or alone, positioned in interlocking fields of fire. They used spider holes, tree platforms, and camouflage hides built weeks in advance. Some tied themselves into canopy branches and waited for days without moving, subsisting on rice balls and water. Their rifles, mostly Type 97 sniper variants of the Arisaka bolt action, some with 4X scopes, weren't as advanced as American optics, but the shooters using them had been training since the 1930s, and they had patience. American doctrine was loud and aggressive. Suppress, flank, overwhelm. But you can't suppress what you can't locate. Units would take sniper fire, call in mortar strikes that shredded hundreds of square meters of jungle advance, and get hit again from position 20 meters away from the original. The sniper had never moved. He just waited. Casualties mounted, not in dramatic firefights that made the newsreels, but in the slow, grinding attrition of one man per day. A radio man shot through the throat. A lieutenant hit in the forehead while reading a map. A medic killed while bandaging another sniper victim. It destroyed morale. Soldiers stopped moving during daylight. Patrols became timid. Fear became as effective as bullets. If you want to see more stories like this, weapons and tactics that don't make the textbooks, decisions made by individual soldiers that change outcomes, take 5 seconds and subscribe. That's all it takes. One click. You'll get a new forgotten chapter of military history every week. April 16th, the day before our opening scene. Eldridge's platoon, 32 men from Baker Company, 2nd Battalion, was tasked with securing a ridgeline overlooking the Cagayan Valley. Intelligence reported it lightly defended. That was wrong. They hit the base of the ridge at 0800 hours and immediately took fire, not from a defensive line, but from above. Single space shots. The first round killed Private First Class Eugene Cartwright, 19, from Oklahoma. Instant. The second wounded a squad leader in the shoulder. The platoon went aground. For the next 4 hours, they tried to advance. Every time a man moved, another shot. The sniper, or snipers, they couldn't tell, was invisible. Suppressive fire did nothing. Smoke grenades gave cover for maybe 30 seconds before the wind cleared them. By noon, they had 3 dead and 7 wounded, and they'd advanced less than 100 meters. That's when Eldridge told his lieutenant he was going hunting. The lieutenant, a young officer from Ohio named Donald Kemp, 24 years old, 3 months in country, looked at Eldridge like he'd lost his mind. Hunting? Sergeant, we can't even locate the shooter. Eldridge slung the Model 70 and pulled out a notepad where he'd been sketching shot angles. Sir, I've tracked 4 separate firing positions based on impact sound and bullet trajectory. They're all within a 70-meter radius, elevated between 15 and 25 meters. That's not multiple snipers. That's one man displacing after every second or third shot, and he's moving downslope toward our left flank. Kemp stared at him. How the hell do you know that? Because that's what I do. He's not trying to stop us. He's herding us into a kill zone farther up the ridge. Eldridge pointed to a terrain fold about 200 meters northwest. I'm going to loop around, get above him, and glass the canopy from elevation. If I can spot his hide, I can take the shot. Kemp didn't have a better option. He gave Eldridge 2 men, a Browning automatic rifle gunner for cover, and a rifleman with binoculars as a spotter. Eldridge said no. He said he'd move faster alone and draw less attention. So he went. It took Eldridge 90 minutes to move 300 meters. He didn't follow the trail. He stayed in the thickest vegetation, moving in short, controlled intervals. 3 steps, freeze, listen, scan. 3 more steps. The Model 70 was slung across his back, muzzle down, wrapped in a cloth to keep dirt out of the bore. He climbed a ridgeline spur, found a fallen mahogany tree, and used it as a rest. Then he unwrapped the rifle, chambered around, and began scanning the canopy with a Lyman scope. For 40 minutes, he saw nothing, just leaves, vines, shadows, and then movement, not a person. A rope, a single strand of braided cord, barely visible, swaying slightly in a way that didn't match the wind. Eldridge adjusted his scope, 12 degrees left. There, 87 meters away, 22 meters up in a dipterocarp tree, a platform, camouflaged with cut branches and moss. And on that platform, partially obscured, the silhouette of a man holding a rifle. The Japanese sniper was facing away, scanning the area where Eldridge's platoon was pinned. Eldridge settled the crosshairs on the center of the visible mass. No wind, humidity high, minimal bullet drift, range under 100 meters. He didn't need to adjust elevation. He exhaled halfway, took the slack out of the trigger, and pressed. The 180-grain bullet struck the sniper in the upper back, angled to the chest cavity, and exited below the collarbone. The man slumped forward, held in place by the rope that had been tied around his waist as a safety line. Eldridge cycled the bolt, ejected the spent casing, chambered another round. He kept the scope on target for 30 seconds. No movement. Then he heard it. Another shot, different direction, from a ridge 400 meters northeast. Not one sniper. Two. And now they knew someone was hunting them. Type the word hunter in the comments if you're starting to understand what made Eldridge different. Not just a rifle. The mindset. We'll come back to that. Eldridge didn't return to his platoon. He stayed on the ridge because he figured something out that would define the rest of his war. Japanese snipers were phenomenal at concealment and patience, but they followed patterns. They repositioned predictably. They used the same types of hides. And once you killed one, the others would try to locate you, which meant they'd move, and movement was vulnerability. Over the next 11 hours, April 16th into the early morning of April 17th, Eldridge killed 6 more snipers. He moved constantly. After each shot, he displaced at least 50 meters, sometimes 100, always to higher ground. He used the scope not just to shoot, but to study. He learned to spot the unnatural symmetry of cut foliage, the faint glint of a scope lens catching sunlight, the way certain vines hung too straight, indicating a climbing rope. By nightfall, his platoon had been able to advance and establish a defensive perimeter. They'd taken no further casualties after. Eldridge began his counter-sniper operation, but Eldridge didn't come back. He sent a runner with a message: wounded, continuing mission, will return at dawn. That wounded part was an exaggeration. During his 4th displacement, Eldridge had slid down a slope and taken a bullet through the left thigh. Not from a sniper, but from a Japanese infantryman who'd stumbled onto his position. Eldridge had killed a man with his sidearm, but the damage was done. Entry wound mid-thigh, exit wound lateral. No arterial bleeding, but enough tissue damage that walking was agony. He field-dressed it with sulfur powder and a compression bandage torn from his own shirt. Then he kept moving, because he'd realized something else. The sniper network wasn't random. It was coordinated. Every position offered overlapping observation of the valley trails and ridgelines that the American advance would have to use. If he could break that network, kill enough of them that the survivors lost confidence and withdrew, his entire battalion could move forward. So he made a choice. He would stay on the ridge, alone, wounded, low on water and out of rations. And he would hunt until he ran out of ammunition or the enemy ran out of snipers. That's how we arrived back at April 17th. 0547 hours. The shell crater. Eldridge has been awake for 26 of the last 28 hours. His leg wound is clotted, but the pain is constant. A deep throb that spikes with every heartbeat. He has 11 rounds left for the Model 70. No food, no water. And in the growing daylight, he's glassing a section of canopy 320 meters distant where he believes, based on muzzle flash he spotted during the night, at least 3 more snipers are positioned. He finds the first one at 0603 hours. A spider hole dug into the crook of a tree, 40 feet up, covered with a woven mat of palm fronds. The shooter is partially visible, adjusting his position. Eldridge doesn't have a rangefinder. He estimates distance by the size of the target in his scope and the known height of the tree species. He holds the crosshairs 18 inches above the target's head to compensate for bullet drop and squeezes. The rifle cracks. Through the scope, Eldridge sees the palm mat shudder. The target collapses backward into the spider hole. Now the others know his position. For the next 7 minutes, Eldridge doesn't move. He stays in the crater, submerged to his chest in muddy water. Only his head and the rifle above the surface. He's counting on the Japanese snipers to make the mistake American soldiers always made, trying to locate him by scanning for movement. At 0611 hours, he sees it. A scope lens catching a sliver of morning sun. 43 degrees left of his last target. Range approximately 290 meters. He shifts the rifle 2 inches. Settles. Fires. The lens disappears. 2 down. Then return fire. 3 shots in rapid succession, all hitting the dirt berm 5 feet in front of Eldridge's crater. The shooters have his general area, but not his exact position. Eldridge submerges completely, holds his breath for 20 seconds, surfaces just enough to clear his eyes and scope. He spots muzzle flash. A sniper has fired from a position farther down the ridge, trying to suppress him. The man is in a ground-level hide, maybe 380 meters out, maximum effective range for Eldridge's setup. He doesn't have time for a perfect shot. The other snipers are adjusting. He estimates holdover, aims nearly 2 feet above the target, and fires. For seconds later, he sees the vegetation at the hide entrance thrash violently, then goes still. 3 down. Eldridge cycles the bolt. His hands are shaking now, not from fear, but from dehydration and exhaustion. He has 8 rounds left, and then the jungle goes quiet. This is the moment that separated William Eldridge from every other soldier on that ridge, because he didn't celebrate, didn't relax. He understood that silence meant the enemy was doing exactly what he was doing, waiting for a mistake. So he waited. For 2 hours, he did not move, did not drink, because he had no water, did not eat, because he had no food. He kept the rifle trained on the area where he'd spotted the last targets and controlled his breathing to minimize the rise and fall of his chest. At 0819 hours, he saw a movement, not a sniper. A Japanese officer, identifiable by the sword at his side, moving through the underbrush with 2 soldiers. They were sweeping the area, trying to locate their missing snipers. Eldridge made a decision that would later appear in after-action reports as either tactical brilliance or borderline recklessness. He didn't shoot the officer. He let them pass, because shooting them would reveal his position to any remaining snipers and accomplish nothing strategic. Instead, he watched where they went, and when they stopped to examine one of the spider holes where Eldridge had killed a sniper earlier, he observed their reaction. The officer gestured angrily, pointed toward the American lines, then pointed back toward his own lines, farther up the ridge. They were retreating. The sniper network was broken. Eldridge waited another 30 minutes. Then he saw them. For Japanese soldiers, moving quickly through the trees at a distance of 450 to 500 meters, heading north. 3 carried rifles. 1 carried what looked like a disassembled sniper platform, wooden frame poles, and camouflage netting. They were evacuating. Eldridge didn't take the shot. At that range, with his optic and his physical condition, the probability of a miss was too high, and a miss would tell them he was still active. He let them go. At 1,047 hours, a patrol from Baker Company found him. He was still in the crater, still holding the Model 70, barely conscious. His leg wound had reopened. He'd lost enough blood that his lips were gray. The patrol leader, Staff Sergeant Clarence Morton, later described the scene in a letter home. We thought he was dead, but when we got close, he lifted the rifle and aimed at us before recognizing our uniforms. He'd been out there so long he was running on pure instinct. They carried Eldridge back to the battalion aid station. A medic named Thomas Lau cleaned and resutured the leg wound, pumped him full of plasma, and told him he was done, headed for a hospital ship and stateside rotation. Eldridge refused evacuation. He spent 4 days recovering, lost 12 pounds, ran a fever from an infection that nearly turned septic, and on April 21st, he walked out of the aid tent, collected his rifle from the supply sergeant who'd been holding it, and rejoined his platoon. Here's the part most documentaries skip, because it's not cinematic: the bureaucracy. When word of Eldridge's actions reached battalion headquarters, it triggered a minor administrative crisis. He'd killed at least 7 confirmed enemy combatants, later increased to 11 after patrols recovered bodies and intelligence teams correlated positions with sniper activity reports. But he'd done it with an unauthorized weapon while operating alone and wounded, in violation of about 15 different operational protocols. His company commander recommended him for a Silver Star. The battalion S 3 operations officer tried to initiate disciplinary action for unauthorized use of personal equipment in combat, and division headquarters wanted to know if the Model 70 could be requisitioned in bulk. The answer to that last question was no. Winchester civilian production had been converted to wartime contracts for M1, carbines, and aircraft parts. There were no Model 70s available for military purchase, and even if there were, The Army wasn't going to officially authorize soldiers to buy their own weapons. But word spread. Within 6 weeks, at least 14 soldiers in the 25th Infantry Division had acquired civilian hunting rifles through family shipments, personal purchases, or battlefield acquisition from damaged supply dumps. The models varied: Winchester 70s, Remington 720s, a few sporterized Mausers, but the logic was identical: better accuracy and optics than issue equipment in the hands of men who knew how to use them, and the results were undeniable. Counter-sniper effectiveness in units with these weapons increased measurably. After-action reports from May and June 1945 show a significant drop in American casualties attributed to Japanese snipers in sectors where these rifles were deployed. The Japanese noticed too. Intelligence officers analyzing captured documents found references to American hunter soldiers using precision long rifles that were inflicting disproportionate casualties on sniper detachments. One report, translated after the war, described these shooters as operating without fear of death, alone in forward positions more dangerous than artillery. If that kind of ground-level battlefield adaptation interests you, the stuff that happens when doctrine meets reality and individual soldiers have to improvise survival, then subscribing costs you nothing and helps us keep researching these stories. Real footage, real documents, real names, every week. Hit that button. William Eldridge will continue his sniper operations for the remaining months of the Philippine campaign. His final confirmed count, according to declassified records and unit histories compiled by the 25th Infantry Division Association, was 24 Japanese snipers killed, with another 9 listed as probable based on observed hits without body recovery. He was wounded twice more, once by shrapnel from a mortar round that left his back scarred like a topographic map, once by a bullet that grazed his neck and took off the top of his left ear. And the Winchester Model 70? It never malfunctioned. Not once. Eldridge fired an estimated 1,100 rounds through that rifle between January and August 1945. He cleaned it in the rain with strips of his undershirt. He replaced the scope once after a fall cracked the ocular lens. But the rifle itself, the action, the barrel, the trigger, performed flawlessly. After the Japanese surrender, Eldridge was offered position as a sniper instructor at Fort Benning. He declined. He told his commanding officer he was done shooting at people. He was awarded the Silver Star for actions on April 16th and 17th, 1945. The citation reads, in part, "For gallantry in action against an armed enemy, Sergeant Eldridge, acting on his own initiative and despite serious wounds, conducted a sustained counter-sniper operation that eliminated a significant enemy threat and allowed his unit to advance with minimal casualties. His actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. He kept a rifle, brought it home in his duffel. It wasn't technically legal. Personal weapons were supposed to be surrendered, but by that point, nobody was going to argue with a man who had a Silver Star and a medical file 6 inches thick. There's a broader story here that stretches beyond one sergeant and one rifle. It's about the gap between what institutions provide and what individuals need to survive. The U.S. military in 1944 was the most logistically sophisticated fighting force in human history. It could deliver hot food to soldiers on the front lines. It could airdrop ammunition into besieged positions. But it couldn't deliver enough sniper rifles to counter an enemy who'd spent a decade perfecting ambush warfare in jungle terrain. So soldiers adapted. They used personal funds. They bent regulations. They took risks that quartermasters and lawyers would have forbidden if they'd known. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes those adaptations saved lives. The lessons were learned, but slowly. It wasn't until the Korean War that the U.S. Army began seriously reinvesting in designated marksman programs. The M1C and M1D sniper variants of the Garand came too late for World War II. Vietnam would see another desperate scramble for precision rifles, leading to the adoption of the M21 and eventually the M24 sniper weapon system, which, ironically, was based on the Remington 700, itself a direct descendant of the Winchester Model 70 design philosophy. The commercial hunting rifle that Eldridge bought from a catalog in 1944 was essentially a prototype for every modern military sniper rifle that followed. Controlled feed action, free-floating heavy barrel, low magnification optic with a simple reticle. These are now standard features. But in 1944, they were considered unnecessary luxuries. William Eldridge returned to West Virginia after the war. He worked as a coal mine supervisor, married a schoolteacher named Margaret, raised 3 sons. He didn't talk much about the war, which was common for that generation, but he kept a rifle. And once a year, during deer season, he'd take it into the mountains, the same mountains he'd hunted as a boy, and he'd spend a week alone in the woods. His oldest son, interviewed in 2003 for a veteran's oral history project, said his father told him once, "I don't hunt anymore. I just go out there to remember how to be still." William Edward Eldridge died in 1984 at the age of 62 from complications related to lung damage he'd sustained from years of breathing coal dust. The Model 70 was passed down to his grandson, who still has it. It hasn't been fired since 1979. This story matters because it's a reminder that wars are not fought by doctrines or logistics chains or grand strategies. They're fought by individual human beings making decisions in moments of terror and exhaustion, using whatever tools they can find or afford or improvise. William Eldridge didn't change the course of World War II, but he changed the outcome for the 32 men in his platoon who came home because a sniper network was broken. He changed the outcome for the soldiers in other units who heard his story and realized they didn't have to accept the equipment they were issued. And he helped prove a principle that's still relevant today. Sometimes the best tool for the job isn't the one the institution provides. It's the one the individual chooses. If this story moved you, here's what I need you to do. First, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that real history, told with respect and research, matters more than hype and clickbait. Second, leave a comment answering this question. What would you have done in Eldridge's position? Follow regulations and hope for the best, or buy your own weapon and risk a court-martial? I want to know. And third, subscribe to this channel. We're not here for entertainment. We're here to preserve the memories of people like William Eldridge before they're forgotten. Every subscription is a vote for that mission. Next week, we're covering the Australian soldiers who modified their own submachine guns in the jungles of New Guinea using nothing but files and captured Japanese ammunition, and ended up creating one of the most reliable close-quarters weapons of the Pacific Theater. Until then, remember their names, remember what they did, and remember that history isn't just written by generals. Sometimes it's written by a coal miner's son with a mail-order rifle and nothing left to lose.